My name is Scarlett Bailey. I'm 59 years old, and my world fell apart yesterday. My only son, Peter, married Mila Gilmore, the woman he loves, without telling anyone, without inviting his own mother. How could my own flesh and blood betray me so profoundly, letting me discover his marriage through a casual comment? Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. Until now, I believed I understood the rhythm of my life, my family, and the deep, unbreakable bond I shared with my son, Peter. My existence in Rosewood, Pennsylvania, was composed of comforting routines, Sunday dinners, and the quiet joy of watching Calvin, my husband of 35 years, tend his garden. Peter, our only son, was the shining star in our constellation, a source of immense pride and endless affection. From the moment he first held my finger, through his awkward adolescence, and into the promising young man he had become at 26, I was his greatest supporter, his confidant, his mother, always there, always present. Our home, a cozy colonial nestled among centuries-old oak trees, was not just a home. It was a sanctuary filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the unshakable belief that we were a complete and loving unit. Then came that Sunday, a day that began like any other, bathed in the golden light of a late spring morning. Promising warmth and the usual familial comfort, Peter had arrived for our traditional family brunch, bringing Mila Gilmore, his girlfriend of several years, a sweet young woman whom we had, for all intents and purposes, welcomed into our hearts as family. The table was laden with pancakes, fresh fruit, and the aroma of brewing coffee, a tableau of domestic bliss. Calvin was regaling Peter with stories of his latest fishing adventure, and Mila was chatting animatedly about her new job. Everything felt right, perfectly aligned. As I poured more coffee, a familiar longing stirred within me, a gentle anticipation of the next big step in Peter's life. With a hopeful smile, I turned to my son, my heart swelling with unspoken dreams of wedding bells and future grandchildren. "So, darling," I began, my voice light with expectation, "when are you and Mila planning to finally tie the knot? We're all so eager for the big day, you know." The air in the room, once so vibrant and alive, seemed to crystallize, every sound suddenly muffled, every movement slowed to an agonizing crawl. Peter looked at me, not with surprise, not with hesitation, but with an unnerving, almost casual detachment. His gaze was steady, his expression unreadable, and then the words, uttered so simply, so quietly, yet they crashed through my world with the force of a tidal wave. "Yesterday, Mom, Mila and I got married yesterday afternoon." The pancakes on my plate, the coffee cup in my hand, the laughter that moments before had filled the room, all of it ceased to exist. My blood ran cold, a glacial current seeping into every vein, freezing me in place. The joy, the anticipation, the very essence of my motherly existence splintered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Married? Yesterday? Without me? The question screamed silently in my mind, a chaotic chorus of disbelief and searing pain. How could this be? How could the child I nurtured, the man I adored, have taken such a momentous step, a life-altering vow, and deliberately excluded me, his mother, from the very event I had dreamed of for his entire life? The mystery of his betrayal, raw and immediate, pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. My perfect world had just imploded, and I was left standing amidst the ruins, utterly alone with my shock. The silence that followed Peter's casual pronouncement was not empty. It was a vast, echoing chasm that swallowed every sound, every breath, leaving only the deafening throb of my own shock. Calvin, typically so robust and quick-witted, sat frozen, his fork halfway to his mouth, a piece of pancake impaled upon it. His usually jovial face was a mask of disbelief, mirroring the raw horror blooming in my own heart. Mila, on the other hand, merely offered a small, almost imperceptible smile, a fleeting curve of her lips that struck me as unnervingly placid. Considering the bomb that had just detonated in our serene Sunday morning, it was as if she had expected this reaction, perhaps even anticipated it. Her composure a stark contrast to the earthquake rattling my very foundation. I struggled to speak, my throat suddenly parched, constricted. "Yesterday?" I finally managed to croak, the word a fragile whisper against the crushing weight of the revelation. You got married yesterday? And you didn't tell us? You didn't invite your own parents? My voice rose with each question, a rising crescendo of disbelief and profound hurt. Peter shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze finally meeting mine, but it was a fleeting, almost defensive glance. Mom, we just wanted something small, intimate, he mumbled, avoiding my eyes, turning his attention to the untouched plate before him. No fuss. We thought it would be less stressful for everyone. Less stressful? The words felt like a cruel mockery, twisting the knife deeper into my already wounded spirit. Was my presence, my joy, my unwavering love truly a source of stress for him? Calvin, recovering from his initial stupor, finally found his voice, a low rumble of anger. Peter, what in the world are you talking about? Your mother and I have dreamed of your wedding day since you were a boy. We've saved for it, talked about it, imagined every detail. And you just went and did it? Without us? His voice was laden with a mix of betrayal and paternal disappointment that cut through the strained atmosphere like a razor. Mila's hand subtly reached for Peter's under the table, a gesture that, rather than comforting, felt like a silent affirmation of their united front against us. It was then, in that agonizing moment, that the first true crack appeared in the pristine image I held of my family. Not just in my relationship with Peter, but in the very foundation of trust that I had so carefully nurtured. A cold dread began to seep into my consciousness, a premonition of darker truths lurking beneath the surface of Peter's nonchalance and Mila's quietude. This wasn't merely an oversight, a logistical snafu in wedding planning. This was a deliberate act, a conscious exclusion that spoke volumes about something deeper, something unsettlingly amiss. My perfect son, my loving family, my idyllic life in Rosewood. Suddenly, the edges blurred, the colors faded, and a shadow stretched across everything I held dear. The small, intimate ceremony Peter described, held in some undisclosed location without a single family member present, painted a picture of secrecy, not simplicity. And as I looked at Mila, her eyes now downcast, avoiding my gaze, a chilling question began to form in my mind. What else were they keeping from us? The breakfast, once a symbol of togetherness, now felt like a stage for a cruel unveiling, and the unspoken weight of this betrayal settled heavily in the pit of my stomach. A harbinger of the storm yet to come. The memory of that Sunday morning, the pancakes growing cold, the coffee tasting like ash, remains a vivid, painful scar on my soul. My mind, reeling from Peter's confession, immediately began to scramble, sifting through years of memories, desperately searching for a clue, a hint, any breadcrumb that could explain this unfathomable act. Had I missed something? Was there a moment, a conversation, a subtle shift in Peter's demeanor that I, in my blindness of maternal love, had simply overlooked? My son Peter had always been a gentle, considerate boy, a little reserved perhaps, but fiercely loyal to his family. We had shared everything. His triumphs on the school football field, the heartbreaks of first crushes, the anxieties of college applications. Our relationship, I truly believed, was built on a bedrock of openness and trust. Yet, as I replayed the last few years, a disquieting pattern began to emerge. A subtle erosion of that closeness I cherished. It wasn't overt. There were no grand arguments or dramatic confrontations. Instead, it was a slow, almost imperceptible withdrawal, like a tide subtly receding from the shore. Peter, once so eager to share his day, began offering shorter, less detailed answers. Phone calls became less frequent, visits more scheduled and less spontaneous. At first, I attributed it to the natural progression of adulthood, the busy demands of his burgeoning career in finance, the natural desire for independence. Calvin, always more pragmatic than I, would often say, "He's a man now, Scarlett. He has his own life to live." And I, ever the optimist, would nod, trying to convince myself that this growing distance was normal, a testament to his maturity. The shift became more pronounced after Mila Gilmore entered his life, roughly 3 years ago. She was bright, charming, with an understated elegance that initially I found appealing. But there was always a certain reserve about her, an almost impenetrable calmness that occasionally bordered on coolness. She never quite fully integrated into our boisterous family gatherings. She observed more than she participated, her smile polite, her eyes often darting between Peter and the rest of us as if calculating, assessing. I remember one Christmas Peter, usually so effusive with his gifts, presented me with a rather generic store-bought scarf, a stark contrast to the thoughtful handmade gifts he'd given me every year since he was a child. When I jokingly asked if Mila had helped him choose it, he just shrugged, a small, tight smile on his face, and said, "She thought it was practical. Mom." It was a tiny moment, easily dismissed at the time, but now it resonated with a new, ominous significance. A quiet signal that perhaps Mila's influence was more profound, more pervasive than I had ever allowed myself to consider. There were other instances, small fissures in the facade of our perfect family. Peter stopped confiding in me about work troubles, preferring to discuss them, or so he implied. With Mila, our traditional mother-son lunch dates, once a monthly staple, slowly dwindled, replaced by vague excuses of busy schedules. I remember expressing my concerns to Calvin once, a year or so ago, about Peter's increasing detachment. He simply patted my hand. "He's building his own world, Scarlett. It's part of growing up." But my gut instinct, that deep maternal intuition, whispered that something wasn't right. It was a subtle, unsettling feeling, a dissonant chord in the melody of our lives, that I, in my desperate need to preserve the image of my happy family, had consciously suppressed. Now, with the brutal revelation of the secret wedding, these forgotten moments, these quiet anxieties, roared back to life, each one a damning piece of a puzzle I never knew I was meant to solve. The life perfect I so painstakingly constructed was not just cracking. It was crumbling, revealing a treacherous landscape beneath, paved with unspoken truths and deliberate omissions. The days following Peter's shocking announcement were a blur of raw emotion and agonizing confusion. The easy warmth of our home in Rosewood was replaced by a chilling silence, heavy with unspoken accusations and profound hurt. Calvin, usually the rock, retreated into himself, his face etched with a pain that mirrored my own, perhaps even deepened by the added sting of paternal disappointment. He tried to speak to Peter to understand, but his son's responses were evasive, laced with a new defensiveness that was completely alien to the boy we had raised. Peter would repeat the mantra of keeping it small, no fuss, as if those words alone could erase the monumental breach of trust. Mila, ever the quiet presence, offered no explanation, no apology, her serene expression unwavering, which only served to fuel my growing resentment. My initial shock began to morph into a desperate, burning need for answers. I couldn't simply accept this. A mother doesn't just get over being excluded from her only son's wedding. It was more than just a missed ceremony. It was a deliberate severing of a fundamental bond, a rejection that cut to the very core of my being. The polite excuses, the vague platitudes, they all felt like flimsy veils attempting to conceal a far uglier truth. My maternal intuition, once suppressed, now screamed with alarm. This wasn't Peter, not truly. There was a coldness, a calculated distance in his recent actions that felt entirely out of character for the loving, albeit sometimes reserved son I knew. This shift, I increasingly suspected, was intertwined with Mila. The threat, initially an emotional one, began to feel more concrete, more insidious. Mila, who had always been a quiet presence, suddenly seemed like a formidable, almost manipulative force. I started observing her more closely, replaying past interactions, searching for any telltale signs I might have missed. I remembered a conversation about our family heirlooms, a set of antique silver passed down through generations. Mila had expressed a keen interest, asking surprisingly detailed questions about their history and value, questions that at the time I attributed to polite curiosity. Now they felt like an inventory, a subtle probing into our family's assets. Her influence on Peter, which I had once dismissed as merely the sway of a new love, now appeared more like a deliberate, systematic redirection of his loyalties. One afternoon, desperate for clarity, I called Peter. He sounded distant, almost impatient. I tried to express my pain, my confusion, to plead for an explanation that made sense. "Peter, how could you do this to us?" "To me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What happened? Did we do something wrong? His response was chilling in its lack of empathy. "Mom, you're making a big deal out of nothing. It was our choice. You need to respect that." The coldness in his voice, the dismissal of my profound hurt, was a stark manifestation of the growing chasm between us. He was no longer just a son who had made a questionable decision. He was a stranger, guarded and seemingly controlled by an unseen force. This conversation solidified my fears. The perfect son I thought I knew was slipping away, pulled into a narrative that felt foreign and hostile. The intimate wedding, devoid of his own family, no longer seemed like a simple preference. It felt like a deliberate act of isolation, designed to create a new, exclusive unit where Calvin and I had no place. The intentions of Mila, once vaguely unsettling, began to manifest as clearly defined, if still unspoken, hostility. It was a silent war, fought with polite smiles and carefully chosen words, but the battle lines were drawn. And I, Scarlett Bailey, suddenly realized I was fighting not just for an explanation, but for the very soul of my son and for the fragmented remains of my family. The tension, once a dull ache, now pulsed with an urgent, dangerous rhythm, pulling me deeper into a situation far more perilous than I had ever imagined. The escalating tension within our family, previously a silent, simmering current, reached a boiling point during what should have been a celebratory occasion: Peter's 27th birthday. I had meticulously planned a small dinner at our home, hoping that a familiar, loving environment might soften the hardened edges that had emerged since the wedding. I spent hours preparing all of Peter's favorite dishes, setting the table with our finest china, convinced that the warmth of tradition might somehow bridge the growing chasm between us. Calvin, despite his own hurt, supported me, hoping, as I did, for a moment of genuine connection. Peter arrived with Mila, their presence immediately casting a pall over the room. Their smiles felt forced, their answers to our eager questions clipped and dismissive. The polite facade they maintained felt thinner than ever, barely concealing an underlying impatience. As we sat down to eat, I tried to steer the conversation towards happier times, recalling humorous anecdotes from Peter's childhood, attempting to evoke the warmth and laughter that once characterized our family meals. But each attempt was met with a strained silence, or a quick change of subject by Mila, who seemed to effortlessly redirect Peter's attention whenever he showed even a flicker of engaging with us. The climax of the threat, the moment that truly put my perception of everything at risk, came when I presented Peter with his birthday gift. It was a vintage wristwatch, a beautiful heirloom that had belonged to my father, then to Calvin, and was meant to be passed down to Peter as a symbol of our family's enduring legacy. I had polished it myself, imagining the joy in his eyes. "Happy birthday, my darling," I said, my voice thick with emotion as I offered him the small velvet box. "This belonged to your grandfather. It's a piece of our history, Peter, a reminder of all the love that binds us." Peter took the box, his expression unreadable. He opened it, glancing briefly at the watch. Then, almost imperceptibly, his eyes flickered towards Mila. It was her reaction that truly unnerved me. A subtle, almost predatory gleam entered her eyes, and she gave Peter a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Peter, following her silent command, then looked back at me, a polite yet utterly hollow smile on his face. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice flat. "It's very traditional. But I actually just bought myself a new smartwatch last week. You know, something more modern, more practical for work." He set the box down on the table, not even bothering to fasten the clasp, leaving the watch exposed, discarded. My heart plummeted into the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just the rejection of the gift. It was the casual dismissal of its profound sentimental value, the blatant disregard for our family's legacy, and the chilling realization that Mila's influence was so absolute, so complete, that Peter would openly disrespect his own mother, his own heritage on his birthday. The room suddenly felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken words and bitter disappointment. Calvin, sensing my devastation, reached for my hand under the table, his grip tight, a silent acknowledgement of the brutal assault on my spirit. The act felt like a calculated strike, a declaration of independence from everything we represented, orchestrated by Mila. It wasn't just a slight. It was a deliberate erasure of our history, a symbolic severing of the ties that bound us. In that moment, watching my son, my precious Peter, discard a piece of his own family's soul at the silent behest of his wife, I felt a desperate, visceral terror. It was the terror of losing him completely, of seeing him become someone I no longer recognized, controlled by a force I couldn't comprehend. The life I cherished, the son I adored, everything I held dear was under attack, and I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of helplessness, a chilling despair that settled deep into my bones. The clink of silverware, the muted conversation, all faded into a buzzing background noise as I stared at the discarded watch, a silent witness to the destruction of my world. The aftermath of Peter's birthday dinner was a profound, suffocating silence that permeated our home for days. I moved through my routines like a ghost, the vibrant colors of my world drained to a monochrome of grief and bewilderment. Calvin, bless his heart, tried to console me, offering quiet words of comfort, but even his steadfast presence couldn't mend the gaping wound in my soul. I was adrift, lost in a sea of questions, desperately searching for a lighthouse in the swirling fog of my despair. How could I have been so blind? How could my son, my own flesh and blood, have become so distant, so callous, so utterly influenced by another? It was during one of these somber, sleepless nights that a spark of resistance, a flicker of my old self, began to ignite within me. Lying awake, replaying every painful interaction, Peter's dismissive comment about the vintage watch, something more modern, more practical, echoed in my mind. Then, Mila's subtle head shake, her almost imperceptible gesture of disapproval, replayed itself with chilling clarity. It wasn't just about the watch. It was about control, about severing my connection to Peter. But it was also about the value of the watch, the inherent worth of an heirloom. My father had always been meticulous about his possessions, and I distinctly remembered him telling me that the watch, a rare limited edition, was quite valuable, not just sentimentally, but monetarily. A plan, nascent and fragile, began to form in the quiet darkness. I realized I couldn't confront Peter directly, not yet. His defenses were too high, his new allegiance too strong. I needed proof, something undeniable that could pierce through the carefully constructed facade. My initial thought was to find out where Peter and Mila had actually gotten married. The small, intimate wedding story felt increasingly flimsy. If it was truly so insignificant, why the secrecy from his own parents? I remembered Peter mentioning, in passing, a quaint little town called Willow Creek, about an hour's drive away, where Mila had a distant aunt. He'd mentioned they'd visited the place a few times. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point. The next morning, armed with a newfound resolve, I approached Calvin. He listened patiently as I articulated my suspicions, my desire to understand what was truly happening. His initial reaction was one of caution, urging me not to jump to conclusions, but the pain in my eyes, the conviction in my voice, eventually won him over. "Scarlett," he said, his voice soft but firm, "whatever it takes, we'll do it together. We'll find out the truth." His unwavering support was a lifeline, pulling me back from the brink of despair. My first act of resistance, carefully disguised, was to casually mention to Peter that I had been thinking of getting the vintage watch appraised, just to get it insured properly, hoping he wouldn't sense my true motive. He merely grunted in acknowledgement, still seemingly uninterested. This confirmed my suspicion that the monetary value of the watch hadn't been his primary concern in rejecting it, but rather the emotional attachment it represented to us. Next, I began to discreetly gather information. I started by searching local marriage records for Willow Creek, a tedious and disheartening task, but one I undertook with grim determination. I also subtly reached out to a few old acquaintances, friends of Peter's from high school who still lived in the area, feigning casual curiosity about Peter's life and any news about the newly married couple. My hope was to piece together fragments of their hidden world, to find a crack in their carefully constructed secrecy. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about understanding how my son could have been so utterly estranged from us. The hope, once a faint glimmer, was now a steady flame, fueling my resolve to expose whatever darkness lay beneath the surface, to fight for the son I loved and the family I believed in. The game had changed. I was no longer a victim, but an investigator, determined to unearth the truth, no matter how painful it might be. My clandestine investigation, fueled by a mother's desperate love and a gnawing sense of betrayal, began to yield unexpected, albeit unsettling, results. The marriage records search for Willow Creek proved to be a dead end. There was no official record of a Peter Bailey and Mila Gilmore wedding in the time frame Peter had so casually mentioned. This omission, rather than discouraging me, amplified my suspicions. Why lie about something so easily verifiable unless there was a deeper deception at play? The small, intimate story was crumbling even faster than I had anticipated. My conversations with Peter's old friends, however, provided a crucial breakthrough. Sarah, a kind-hearted woman who had been Peter's classmate since kindergarten, cautiously shared a piece of information that chilled me to the bone. "Scarlett," she began, her voice lowered. "I don't know if I should be telling you this, but I saw Peter and Mila a few weeks ago in Willow Creek. They were coming out of the courthouse, but they weren't alone. There was an older man with them, a lawyer, I think, Mr. Harrison. He's known for handling estate planning and complicated financial matters around here." Estate planning? Financial matters? The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Peter was only 27. Why would he need an estate lawyer, especially one known for complex financial dealings, immediately after a supposed intimate wedding? This new piece of the puzzle clicked into place with disquieting precision, aligning with Mila's seemingly innocuous questions about our family heirlooms and Peter's dismissive attitude toward the vintage watch. It wasn't just about severing emotional ties. It was about something far more tangible, far more sinister. Mila's reserved nature, which I had once interpreted as shyness, now reeked of calculated discretion. Her placid demeanor, once seen as calm, now felt like a cold, calculating facade. My son, my Peter, was being drawn into something far beyond a simple marital dispute. He was entangled in a web of financial manipulation, and Mila, I realized with a sickening lurch, was almost certainly the architect. I immediately shared this discovery with Calvin. His face, already lined with worry, tightened further as I recounted Sarah's revelation. "A lawyer? Estate planning?" he murmured, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "Scarlett, this goes beyond a simple wedding snub. This sounds like exploitation." His words, though painful, validated my deepest fears. We both knew Mr. Harrison's reputation. He was meticulous, sharp, and notoriously expensive. For Peter, a young man just starting his career, to engage such a lawyer implied significant financial dealings we knew nothing about. The need for external help became undeniably clear. This was no longer a matter we could handle within the confines of our family. We needed professional expertise, someone who could navigate the legal and financial intricacies that were now clearly at play. I knew just the person. Eleanor Vance, a formidable attorney and a distant cousin of Calvin's, renowned for her sharp intellect and unwavering integrity. She had always been a quiet, supportive presence in our extended family, and I knew I could trust her implicitly. Summoning every ounce of courage, I called Eleanor. I laid bare the entire agonizing story. Peter's secret wedding, the unexplained distance, the discarded watch, and now the alarming revelation of Mr. Harrison's involvement. Eleanor listened intently, her silence punctuated only by the occasional rustle of papers on her end. When I finished, her voice, calm and steady, was a balm to my frazzled nerves. "Scarlett," she said, "this certainly sounds like a calculated maneuver. A secret wedding, no record, and an estate lawyer known for aggressive financial strategies. It raises serious red flags. My intuition tells me there's more at stake here than just wounded feelings." She assured me she would start digging, beginning with a discreet inquiry into Mr. Harrison's recent cases and Peter's financial activities. She advised us to remain calm, to continue observing, but not to confront Peter or Mila directly until we had more concrete evidence. The relief that washed over me was immense. We were no longer alone in this fight. Eleanor's involvement felt like a shield, a promise of professional guidance in a battle that had suddenly become far more complex and dangerous than I had ever dared to imagine. The hope that had flickered within me now burned brighter, not for a reconciliation, but for the truth, and for the possibility of extricating my son from whatever dark entanglement he had fallen into. Eleanor's investigation moved with a quiet, methodical precision that was both reassuring and terrifying. Within days, she began to uncover a mosaic of deception that painted a chilling picture of Mila's true intentions and Peter's unwitting entanglement. The first and most damning piece of evidence was the revelation that Peter and Mila's wedding was not, in fact, a legally binding ceremony. They had indeed visited the courthouse in Willow Creek, but not to obtain a marriage license. Instead, they had finalized a partnership agreement for a newly formed limited liability company, LLC, under both their names. This LLC, Eleanor discovered, was the sole beneficiary of a recently established trust. The details of the trust were even more shocking. It had been meticulously drafted by Mr. Harrison, the estate lawyer, and, in a cruel twist of irony, its primary assets were to be inherited from Peter's side of the family, particularly after the passing of his parents. This meant that, while Peter was listed as a co-owner of the LLC, Mila, through her control of the partnership agreement and her strategic positioning within the trust, stood to gain significantly from our eventual demise. The marriage was a carefully orchestrated charade, a smokescreen designed to give Mila a legal claim to our family's wealth, all while bypassing the traditional legal protections of a true marital union and, most painfully, excluding us, the rightful inheritors of our own legacy. The emotional impact of this revelation was devastating. Calvin, upon hearing Eleanor's meticulous summary, crumbled. The man who had been my steady anchor through so many storms now sat with his head in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "My son," he choked out, his voice raw with disbelief. "My own son, ensnared in such a cruel scheme." My own grief was a sharp, burning pain, but beneath it, a furious resolve ignited. This wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a cold, calculated act of fraud, a predatory manipulation of my son's affections and our family's trust. Eleanor, seeing our distress, remained calm and professional. She explained that while the partnership agreement itself wasn't illegal, the deliberate misrepresentation of their marital status, coupled with the clear intent to financially benefit from our assets without our knowledge or consent, constituted a strong case for undue influence and potentially fraud. She had also discreetly gathered information suggesting that Mila had a history of forming similar partnerships with other individuals, each ending with her walking away with significant financial gain, leaving her former partners in precarious situations. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, Eleanor advised us to confront Peter and Mila. The confrontation took place in our living room, the very heart of our home, now a battleground. Eleanor was present, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the volatile emotions swirling around us. Peter and Mila arrived, initially attempting to maintain their composed facade, feigning ignorance and annoyance at what they clearly perceived as our overreacting. But as Eleanor meticulously laid out the evidence, the non-existent marriage license, the LLC documents, the details of the trust, and Mila's suspicious financial history, their carefully constructed world began to crack. Peter's face, initially defensive, slowly morphed into a mask of stunned disbelief, then dawning horror. He looked at Mila, his eyes wide with a dawning realization, the true nature of her deception finally penetrating his carefully constructed blindness. Mila, however, maintained her composure for as long as she could, her eyes hardening, a flicker of cold anger replacing her usual placidity. She tried to interrupt, to dismiss Eleanor's claims as baseless accusations, but the weight of the evidence was too overwhelming. The impact of the truth on Peter was heartbreaking to witness. He finally understood. The intimate wedding, the no-fuss excuse, the rejection of the family heirloom. It all clicked into place, revealing a sinister puzzle orchestrated by the woman he believed he loved. The pain of his betrayal was now compounded by the agonizing realization of his own foolishness, his blind trust. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing remorse, a desperate plea for forgiveness that tore at my heart, even as the sting of his actions remained. The lies were unmasked, the truth, brutal and undeniable, laid bare for all to see, irrevocably altering the landscape of our family forever. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was a chaotic whirlwind of raw emotions and bitter accusations. Peter, his face pale and shattered, finally broke down, the dam of his carefully guarded emotions bursting open. He looked at Mila, not with love, but with a bewildered horror, the realization of her manipulative deception finally sinking in. "Mila, how could you?" he whispered, his voice choked with disbelief and a profound sense of betrayal. "How could you do this to us? To my family?" Mila, stripped of her placid facade, finally revealed her true colors. Her eyes, once so serene, now blazed with a cold, venomous anger. She lashed out, not at us, but at Peter, her voice sharp and cutting. "Don't be so naive, Peter. You were always too sentimental, too caught up in your mother's fairy tale. This was always about securing our future, my future. You were too blind to see the opportunities right in front of you." Her words, delivered with a chilling disdain, confirmed every one of my darkest suspicions and drove another dagger into Peter's already bleeding heart. Eleanor, ever the professional, stepped in to de-escalate the volatile situation. She calmly informed Mila that given the evidence of fraud, undue influence, and potential financial manipulation, legal action would be pursued immediately. She outlined the implications of the partnership agreement and the trust, emphasizing the severe legal consequences Mila would face. The threat of legal proceedings, coupled with the undeniable truth, finally broke Mila's aggressive stance. Her bravado crumbled, replaced by a desperate, panicked fear. Within hours, and with Eleanor's swift legal guidance, a restraining order was issued against Mila, preventing her from having any contact with Peter or attempting to access any of their shared assets. The police were involved, and while a formal arrest wasn't made on the spot due to the complexity of financial fraud, a full investigation was launched. Mila, defiant until the very end, was escorted out of our home, her parting glare filled with a hatred that solidified the absolute evil of her intentions. The silence that followed her departure was not the agonizing quiet of before, but a fragile, cathartic calm, a space for the shattered pieces to begin to settle. The public and family reaction to the unfolding drama was a mix of shock, outrage, and profound sympathy. Word travels fast in Rosewood. Friends and neighbors who had always admired our seemingly perfect family were stunned by the depth of the deception. Many expressed their support, offering meals, kind words, and unwavering understanding. The initial shame I felt was slowly replaced by a sense of vindication. The truth, however painful, had finally come to light. Peter, however, was a broken man. The immediate resolution saw him reeling from the dual blows of betrayal by the woman he loved and the crushing weight of his own naivety. He was inconsolable, consumed by guilt and remorse for the pain he had inflicted upon us, for his blindness, for allowing himself to be manipulated so cruelly. He apologized profusely, his voice thick with tears, begging for our forgiveness, for a chance to make amends. Calvin, though deeply hurt, embraced our son, his paternal love overriding his disappointment. I, too, held Peter, the warmth of his embrace a bittersweet comfort. The journey to justice was only just beginning. Eleanor assured us that unraveling the legal and financial mess Mila had created would be a complex and lengthy process. There would be court hearings, investigations, and the arduous task of disentangling Peter from the fraudulent partnership agreement. But for now, the immediate threat was gone. Mila was out of our lives, and the truth had prevailed. The first steps towards healing had been taken, marked by Peter's agonizing but necessary confrontation with reality, and the fragile, yet resolute, rebuilding of trust within our family. The pain remained, a constant echo, but a path forward, however arduous, had finally emerged from the wreckage. The months following Mila's departure and the full unraveling of her deceit were a period of intense, often agonizing, reconstruction for our family. The initial shock gave way to a long, arduous process of healing, both legally and emotionally. Eleanor Vance, true to her word, proved to be an invaluable ally. She meticulously worked to disentangle Peter from the fraudulent partnership agreement, navigating complex legal battles that stretched for nearly a year. The process was draining, revealing even more layers of Mila's manipulative financial schemes, which extended far beyond our family's assets. Ultimately, with Eleanor's relentless efforts and the irrefutable evidence she presented, Mila faced legal repercussions for her actions, though the full extent of her punishment remains a private matter. The trust was dissolved, and our family's assets were secured, but the scars of the ordeal ran deep. For Peter, the trauma was immense. The betrayal by Mila, coupled with the profound guilt of having unwittingly participated in such a scheme against his own family, left him deeply shaken. He underwent counseling, working through the emotional wreckage, grappling with his own naivety and the painful lessons learned. He spent countless hours apologizing to Calvin and me, his remorse palpable and sincere. There were tearful conversations, difficult questions asked and answered, and a slow, deliberate rebuilding of the trust that had been so brutally shattered. He moved back home for a while, a symbolic return to the sanctuary he had once abandoned, seeking solace and stability within the familiar walls of our Rosewood home. For Calvin and me, the healing was a complex tapestry of forgiveness, grief, and renewed appreciation for each other. We had faced an unimaginable crisis, and it had, in its own way, strengthened our bond. We learned to communicate more openly, to voice our concerns without fear, and to cherish the simple, unwavering presence of our love. The pain of Peter's secret wedding and his temporary estrangement will always be a part of our family story, a poignant reminder of how easily trust can be manipulated and how precious true family connections are. But through the darkness, we found resilience. Today, nearly 2 years later, life in Rosewood has regained a semblance of its former tranquility, albeit with a deeper understanding of its fragility. Peter has slowly but surely begun to rebuild his life. He has found a new sense of purpose in his career, choosing a path that aligns more with his values rather than the allure of quick financial gain. He is cautious, more discerning in his relationships, but he is also more open, more connected to us than ever before. Our Sunday dinners have returned, filled once again with genuine laughter and heartfelt conversations. The vintage watch, the one he once discarded, now sits proudly on his wrist, a powerful symbol of reconciliation, a constant reminder of the painful journey we endured, and the unbreakable legacy of our family's love. The lessons learned from this harrowing experience are profound. I learned that love, even a mother's love, is not always enough to shield those we cherish from manipulation and deceit. I learned the importance of listening to that quiet, insistent voice of intuition, even when it whispers uncomfortable truths. But most importantly, I learned about resilience, the incredible capacity of the human spirit to heal, to forgive, and to rebuild. Our family, though forever marked by the ordeal, emerged stronger, more honest, and more deeply appreciative of the unwavering power of truth. The echoes of the past still resonate, a somber melody in the background of our lives, but the prevailing harmony is one of enduring love, hard-won wisdom, and the quiet triumph of truth finally prevailing. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on the hidden truths lurking beneath the surface, please like this video. Share in the comments what resonated most with you, and to ensure you don't miss any of our real-life stories of family drama and betrayal, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Your next dose of reality awaits.